Charles Joseph Joe Clark, PC CC AOE, is a Canadian statesman, businessman, writer, and politician who served as the 16th Prime Minister of Canada, from June 4, 1979, to March 3, 1980. Despite his relative inexperience, Clark rose quickly in federal politics, entering the House of Commons in the 1972 election and winning the leadership of the Progressive Conservative Party in 1976. He came to power in the 1979 election, defeating the Liberal government of Pierre Trudeau and ending 16 years of continuous Liberal rule, taking office the day before his 40th birthday. Clark is the youngest person to become Prime Minister. His tenure was brief as he only won a minority government, and it was defeated on a motion of non-confidence. Clark's Progressive Conservative Party subsequently lost the 1980 election, and Clark lost the leadership of the party in 1983. He returned to prominence in 1984 as a senior cabinet minister in Brian Mulroney's cabinet, retiring from politics after not standing for re-election for the House of Commons in 1993. He made a political comeback in 1998 to lead the Progressive Conservatives before its dissolution, serving his final term in Parliament from 2000 to 2004. Clark today is recognized as a distinguished scholar and statesman, and serves as a university professor and is president of his own consulting firm. Early years. Charles Joseph Clark was born in High River, Alberta, the son of Grace Rosalyn and local newspaper publisher Charles A. Clark. He has a brother, Peter, a judge, presiding in Calgary, and a sister, Catherine. Education, journalism, marriage. Clark attended local schools and the University of Alberta, where he earned bachelor's and master's degrees in political science. While in high school, he gained journalism experience with the High River Times and the Calgary Albertan. In his first year at the University of Alberta, Clark joined the staff of the campus newspaper Gateway and eventually became editor-in-chief. Clark was also a member of the University of Alberta Debate Society. He later worked one summer at the Edmonton Journal, where he met his future biographer, David L. Humphreys. He also worked one summer with the Canadian Press in Toronto, and for a time seriously considered a career in journalism. Clark then attended Dalhousie Law School. However, he spent more time with the Dalhousie Student Union, Progressive Conservative Politics and the Dalhousie Gazette than on his courses. After leaving Dalhousie, he unsuccessfully pursued first-year law studies at the University of British Columbia Faculty of Law in Vancouver. Clark again became active in student politics, serving as president of the Progressive Conservative Youth Wing for 2 terms. He then worked full-time for the Progressive Conservative Party. In 1973, Clark married law student Maureen McTeer. They met when Clark hired her work in his parliamentary office. McTeer had been a political organizer herself since her early teens. McTeer has developed her own career as a well-known author and lawyer, and caused something of a fuss by keeping her maiden name after marriage. That feminist practice was not common at the time, but was later taken up by other political wives, such as Hillary Clinton. Their daughter, Catherine, has pursued a career in public relations and broadcasting. Early political career. Clark became politically active while at university, although he had been aware from a young age of politics in Canada and was an admirer of Prime Minister John Diefenbaker. He competed with the University of Alberta Debate Society. He served as president of the University of Alberta Young Progressive Conservatives, and eventually served as national president for the Young PCs group. Clark sparred with future political rival Michael Preston Manning in debate forums on campus between the Young PCs and the Youth League of the Alberta Social Credit Party. Clark encountered another future arrival when he met Brian Mulroney at a National Young PCs meeting in 1958. Clark spent time in France to improve his fluency in the French language, and also took courses in French while he was living in Ottawa. He eventually became comfortable speaking and answering questions in French, which helped his political standing in Quebec. He entered politics at age 28 but was unsuccessful as candidate for the provincial Progressive Conservatives in the 1967 provincial election. Clark served as a chief assistant to provincial opposition leader and future Premier Peter Lougheed, and served in the office of federal opposition leader Robert Stanfield, learning the inner workings of government. Clark missed being elected to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta in the 1971 provincial election. However, he ran in the federal election held a year later, and was elected to Parliament as the MP for Rocky Mountain, a largely rural riding in southwestern Alberta. Clark was the first Canadian politician to take a strong stand for decriminalization of marijuana in Canada, and for a guaranteed minimum income for everyone. Both positions were characteristic of the Red Tories. In many ways his social liberalism was as bold in the 1970s as Trudeau's was in the 1960s. These positions put Clark at odds with the right-wing members of his caucus, several members of which were not afraid to confront him. For example, in the lead-up to the 1979 election, the bulk of Clark's riding was merged into the newly created riding of Bow River during a redistribution of ridings. Fellow Tory MP Stanley Schumacher had much of his old riding of Palliser merged into Bow River as well. Even though Clark was now party leader, Schumacher refused to step aside in Clark's favor, forcing Clark to run in nearby Yellowhead. Progressive Conservative Leadership Convention 1976. Following the resignation of PC Party leader Robert Stanfield, Clark sought and won the leadership of the PC Party at the 1976 Leadership Convention. Initially, the favourite among Red Tories was Flora MacDonald. However, she did worse than expected, while Clark placed a surprising third in a field of 11 on the first ballot of convention delegates, behind only Claude Wagner and Brian Mulroney. MacDonald dropped off after the second ballot, encouraging her supporters to support Clark, who quickly became the compromise Red Tory candidate. The party's right wing rallied behind Wagner. Mulroney, a Quebec businessman with no elected political experience, was unable to expand his base of support significantly. Many delegates were offended by his expensive leadership campaign, as other Red Tory candidates were eliminated during the first 4 ballots. Clark gradually overtook Mulroney and then Wagner to emerge as the victor on the 4th ballot, by 1,187 votes to 1,122. Clark, who won the Tory leadership at age 36, remains the youngest ever leader of a major federal party in the history of Canadian politics, with many veteran Tories having been defeated in the 1968 election. The party effectively skipped a generation by selecting Clark as its new leader. Opposition leader, 1976–79. Joe Clark's rapid rise from a relatively unknown Alberta MP to the leader of the opposition took much of Canada by surprise. The Toronto Star announced Clark's victory with a headline that read, "Joe Who?", giving Clark a nickname that stuck for years. Much joking was made of Clark's clumsiness and awkward mannerisms. Skinny and tall, he became a frequent target for editorial cartoonists, who delighted in portraying him as a sort of walking candy apple, with an enormous head and floppy dog-like ears. Cartoonist Andy Donato typically drew Clark with mittens on strings hanging from his suit sleeves. Initially, it seemed unlikely unlikely that a man who was the source of so much mockery could ever hope to compete against the confident and intellectual Pierre Trudeau. It also did not help that the Progressive Conservatives lost a string of by-elections on May 24, 1977. However, Clark remained belligerent in his attacks on the Trudeau government, angrily clashing with the Prime Minister in Parliament. He hired experienced staffers such as Lowell Murray, Duncan Edmonds, and William Neville, who shaped his policies and ran his office efficiently. He improved his party's standing in national opinion polls. Clark worked very hard, and gradually earned the respect of most people, including his own caucus, by presenting a series of well-thought-out speeches and questions in Parliament. He benefited when live television came to the House of Commons in 1977, allowing viewers to see that he was evolving into a real rival for Trudeau. Clark, despite being perceived by many people as something of a square, showed biting wit at times while in opposition. One of his most famous quips was, "A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job. Recovery is when Pierre Trudeau loses his job." 1979 election. Large budget deficits, high inflation, and high unemployment made the Liberal government unpopular. Trudeau had put off asking the Canadian Governor-General to call an election as long as possible, in the hope that his party could recover popular support, but it backfired, as there was growing public antipathy towards his perceived arrogance. Clark campaigned on the slogans, "Let's get Canada working again," and "It's time for a change. Give the future a chance." In the latter half of the campaign, the Liberals focused their attacks on Clark's perceived inexperience. Their advertisements declared, "This is no time for on-the-job training," and "We need tough leadership to keep Canada growing. A leader must be a leader." Clark played into the hands by appearing bumbling and unsure in public. When Clark undertook a tour of the Middle East in order to show his ability to handle foreign affairs issues, his luggage was lost, and Clark appeared to be uncomfortable with the issues being discussed. That incident was widely lampooned by Toronto Sun cartoonist Andy Donato. During the same tour, while inspecting a military honor guard, Clark turned too soon and nearly bumped into a soldier's bayonet. One of the first major media reports on the incident claimed, with some exaggeration, that he had nearly been beheaded. Clark was bilingual, but the PC party was also unable to make much headway in Quebec, which continued to be federally dominated by the Liberals. While Clark's 1976 leadership rivals were prominent in the province, Claude Wagner had left politics, while Brian Mulroney was still bitter about his loss and turned down an offer to serve under Clark. Nonetheless, Clark's Progressive Conservatives won 136 seats to end 16 continuous years of Liberal rule. The Progressive Conservatives won the popular vote in 7 provinces. They also made huge gains in Ontario, particularly in the Toronto suburbs. However, they were only able to win 2 seats in Quebec, leaving them 6 seats short of a majority. The Liberals lost 27 seats, including several high-profile cabinet ministers, and Trudeau announced his intention to step down as party leader. Prime Minister, 1979-80. On June 4, 1979, the day before his 40th birthday, Clark was sworn in as Canada's youngest Prime Minister, helming the first Tory government since the defeat of John Diefenbaker in the 1963 election. With a minority government in the House of Commons, Clark had to rely on the support of the Social Credit Party, with its 6 seats, or the New Democratic Party, with its 26 seats. At the time, opposition leader Trudeau said that he would allow the Progressive Conservatives a chance to govern, though he warned the Prime Minister were against dismantling Petro-Canada, which was unpopular in Clark's home province of Alberta. Social credit was below the 12 seats needed for official party status in the House of Commons. However, the 6 seats would have been just enough to give Clark's government a majority had the Progressive Conservatives formed a coalition government with social credit, or had the two parties otherwise agreed to work together. Clark managed to lure Sockard MP Richard Janel to the government caucus, but this still left the Tories 5 seats short of a majority. Clark, however, decided that he would govern as if he had a majority, and refused to grant the small Sockard official party status, form a coalition, or cooperate with the party in any way. Clark was unable to accomplish much in office because of the tenuous situation of his minority government. However, historians have credited Clark's government with making access to information legislation a priority. The Clark government introduced Bill C-15, the Freedom of Information Act, which established a broad right of access to government records, an elaborate scheme of exemptions, and a 2-stage review process. The legislation was debated at second reading at the end of November 1979 and was referred to the Standing Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs. Within days the minority Conservative government was unseated. The legislation died on the order paper. The re-elected Trudeau government subsequently based its Access to Information Act on the Clark government's Bill C-15. The Access to Information Act received royal assent in July 1982 and came into force in July 1983. The public now has the legal right of access to government records in some 150 federal departments and agencies. Though the election had been held in May, Parliament did not resume sitting until October, one of the longest break periods in Confederation. The gas tax in the budget soured Clark's relationship with Ontario Premier Bill Davis, even though both were Red Tories. Even before the budget, the government was criticized for its perceived inexperience, such as in its handling of its campaign commitment to move Canada's embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Internationally, Clark represented Canada in June 1979 at the 5th G7 summit in Tokyo. Compared to his predecessor as Prime Minister, Clark reportedly had a better relationship with U.S. President Jimmy Carter, who phoned Clark to wish him luck in the upcoming 1980 election. Fall of government. During the 1979 election campaign, Clark had promised to cut taxes to stimulate the economy. However, once in office he proposed a budget designed to curb inflation by slowing economic activity, and also proposed an 18-cent per gallon tax on gasoline in order to reduce the budgetary deficit. Finance Minister John Crosbie touted the budget as short-term pain for long-term gain. Though Clark had hoped this change in policy would work to his advantage, it actually earned him widespread animosity as a politician who could not keep his promises even in such a short period. Clark's refusal to work with the Secreds, combined with the 18 cents per gallon, led to the defeat of the government in the House of Commons in December 1979. On December 13, NDP finance critic Bob Rae proposed a sub-amendment to the budget motion, stating that the House of Commons did not approve of the budget. The 5 Sockard MPs had demanded the tax revenues be allocated to Quebec, and when that was turned down, they abstained, which ensured the sub-amendment's passage on a 139 to 133 margin. Clark was criticized for his inability to do math, in failing to predict the outcome, not only because he was in a minority situation, but also because 3 members of his caucus would be absent for the crucial budget vote, as one was ill and 2 were stuck abroad on official business. The Liberals, by contrast, had assembled their entire caucus, save one, for the occasion. 1980 election. The no-confidence vote loss was partially welcomed by Clark and the Tories. When a new election was called, Clark expected his party would be able to defeat the demoralized and leaderless Liberals easily, since Trudeau had announced his intention to step aside and the Liberals had yet to hold a leadership convention. However, the Progressive Conservatives had misjudged the electorate, since they had not commissioned any polls since August. A November Gallup poll published 8 days before the December 11th budget reported that the popularity was down from 36% during the summer to 28%, with the party 19 points behind the Liberals, giving the latter the popular support to initiate the non-confidence motion. After the government fell, Clark's party was caught off guard when Pierre Trudeau quickly rescinded his resignation from the Liberal leadership to lead his party into the subsequent election. Clark's Tories campaigned under the slogan, "Real change deserves a fair chance," but the broken promises were still fresh in voters' minds. Trudeau swept the Liberals back into power in the February 1980 election with 147 seats, against 103 for the Progressive Conservatives. Davis's criticism of the gas tax was used in the Liberals' Ontario television ads. The Tories lost 19 seats in that province, which ultimately proved to be decisive in the campaign. Clark's government would last a total of 9 months less a day. As Clark's finance minister, John Crosbie, famously described it in his own inimitable way, long enough to conceive, just not long enough to deliver. Supreme Court appointments. Clark chose the following jurist to be appointed as a Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada by the Governor-General Julian Chouinard. Relationship between Trudeau and Clark. Trudeau commented in his memoirs, published in 1993, that Clark was much more tough and aggressive than past Tory leader Robert Stanfield, noting that those qualities served Clark well in his party winning the 1979 election victory. However, Trudeau also complimented Clark as a respectable leader and a better choice over Brian Mulroney, who had defeated Clark at the Leadership Convention 1983. Trudeau told his friends that the Tories had chosen the wrong man. When Mulroney took over the reins of the Progressive Conservatives, Trudeau's Liberals attacked them with the slogan, "Bring back Joe," taking aim at how the Tories had replaced the proven leader with an unknown. In contrast to Clark, Trudeau and Mulroney had become bitter enemies over the Meech Lake Accord, despite never having fought an election. At Trudeau's funeral in 2000, his son Justin Trudeau related a story in which he had told a joke about one of his father's chief rivals, and his father had corrected him, lectured him sternly on how it was wrong to insult someone just because they disagreed, and then introduced him to the rival. At this point in the ceremony, the CBC cut to an image of a teary-eyed Clark. There is reason to believe this reference had been to Clark. Opposition leader, 1980–83. Opposition to Clark's leadership began to grow after the fall of the PC minority government, and the party's defeat by a resurgent Liberal Party. There were frequent rumors that several potential challenges were covertly undermining Clark's leadership, though in 1982 Brian Mulroney appeared at a press conference with Clark to say that he was not seeking the leadership of the PC party. The Liberal Party had regained national prominence by leading the No side to victory in the 1980 Quebec referendum and the Constitution. Patriation. While Trudeau's national energy program was hugely unpopular in Western Canada, especially Alberta, it was able to shore up Liberal support in the voter-rich Eastern Canada, particularly Ontario and Quebec, generally having the opposite effect of Clark's proposed gas tax. Difficult budgets and the economic recession resulted in Trudeau's approval ratings declining after the bounce from the 1982 Constitution patriation, and showed his party headed for certain defeat by early 1984, prompting him to retire. However, Clark was unable to stay on as Progressive Conservative leader long enough to regain the prime ministership. At the party's 1981 convention, 33.5% of the delegates supported a leadership review. They felt that Clark would not be able to lead the party to victory again. At the January 1983 convention in Winnipeg, 33.1% supported a review. The fact that Clark had been able to increase his support among party members by only 0.4% was likely a contributing factor to his decision to resign as leader and seek a renewed mandate from the membership through a leadership convention. This was also considering that the governing Liberals under Pierre Trudeau were slipping in polls, and although the PCs had built up a substantial lead in popularity, Trudeau was expected to retire before the election and a new Liberal leader could have been able to pull off a victory. 1983 Leadership Convention. In 1983, after declaring that an endorsement by 66.9% of delegates at the party's biennial convention was not enough, Clark called a leadership convention to decide the issue. Clark immediately nominated to keep his leader's post, and retained support from most of the Red Tories and other party members who were opposed to the public attacks on his leadership by others in the party. Clark already had most of a campaign team up and running by the time he called the leadership convention, as he had mobilized support to help gain in the convention's leadership review. However, Mulroney and John Crosbie had been laying the groundwork for a campaign for some time, with Crosbie expecting Clark to lose or resign soon, and Mulroney supportive of the anti-Clark movement. In a rematch of the 1976 convention, Mulroney emerged as the main challenger, gaining the support of the party's right wing, which viewed Clark as too progressive and opposed his continued leadership. Other party members felt that the federal Liberal Party's stranglehold on Quebec seats could only be broken by a native from that province, which gave Mulroney considerable support. Media coverage emphasized the pro-business and neoliberal bent of most of the candidates as a changing of the guard within the PC party from the more classical conservative and moderate elements. Clark's campaign countered this by trying to polarize the election between right-wingers and a centrist who had been able to win before. The Mulroney campaign responded by continuing the pro-business line. Several candidates agreed to an ABC strategy for the convention, and when news of that backroom deal broke out, support was expected to rally around the party's embattled leader. During delegate voting, Clark won the first ballot, but only won 36.5% of the vote, well short of the 50% required. His support dwindled over the next two ballots. Mulroney, who was endorsed by all but two candidates, defeated Clark on the fourth ballot. Clark urged his supporters to leave the convention united behind Mulroney, and agreed to serve under him. Many political observers and analysts have questioned Clark's rationale for the decision. One famous incident involved a 1987 official dinner held for Prince Charles at Rideau Hall. When the prince met Clark in the receiving line at the function, he asked Clark, why wasn't two-thirds enough? Clark's wife, Maureen McTeer, elaborated on Clark's decision in her 2003 autobiography, In My Own Name. McTeer suggested that for her husband, anything less than a 75% endorsement would not have been a clear enough mandate to forge onwards from the party membership. Clark feared that the 34% of PC members who did not support him would become his most vocal critics in the upcoming election campaign, and that his continued leadership would have led to fractures in the party. Clark was convinced that he could win another leadership race and gain a clear level of support, once his qualities were compared against the handful of politically inexperienced challengers who coveted his position and who were covertly undermining his leadership.